let me get on my video. I'm going to stop presenting for a minute. Hopefully you can see me now.
Yes, I can.
Awesome. So Michelle, are you ready for the first question?
Yes, I am. Okay, so the first question is, what is validation anyway? Why and when does it need to be done?
All right, so this one is an easy one. We'll start with the basics. Even though we use the term validation a lot in this industry, it seems like is a term of the pharmaceutical industry, but it actually started back in 1962 with NASA. They launched a rocket, and 6 minutes later they had to destroy it. On the investigation, they found out that it was a simple error in the programming. It was just a switched, misplaced symbol that took the entire rocket down. So since then, they determined that validation was to be done on all of the systems and everything. So basically, validation is a series of evidences, is a package of documented evidences that an equipment, a test, or a system will produce the intended results consistently, and that will be auditable. And it's basically a predetermined control. You wanna to just a series of proofs that yes, I'm telling you that this will do this, and indeed here's the documentation that yes, it will perform exactly the way it's intended. And in the end of the day, it's about customer safety, right? It's about our patients, the users of the product safety, because you want to make sure that the results, especially on a QC micro setting, you want to make sure a lot of times we test final products, and we want to make sure that these products are safe for the patient. So there is no room for error. So we need that validation, and we need those results, and we need that to be consistent 100% of the time. There is no room for error, because an error could cost a patient life, and that's the last thing we want. So that's that for that one. Easy. What's the next one, Michelle?
The next one we have is, how's validation different from qualification or verification?
Yeah, this is a funny one, because a lot of people use these two terms interchangeably, but they're actually very different things. So when we were talking about what validation is, we were talking about that it's a package of evidences, and the qualification is actually those evidences, right? So the qualification is just a specific tests that you check. For example, on an instrument, you press the start button, you want to make sure that it starts. You say that it will filter 100 mils, you want to make sure that it filters exactly 100 mils, that everything is within its predetermined acceptance criteria, and a series of those qualifications will form the validation. Those are pretty much the tests that you do, the test results. So one thing is not the other, and you cannot have a validation if you don't have a qualification before that. So a bunch of qualifications, and they usually build upon each other. So you can't have an installation qualification before the design qualification, and you can have the operation qualification before the installation qualification. So it's usually a series of qualifications that one builds upon the other, and that forms your entire validation package. So that's very important to know. Because when you're qualifying something, if you call that it's validated, it's technically not validated if you simply perform the qualification. A validation involves a lot of other documentations, series of other evidences, regulatory references, and different things, a lot of times training, SOPs involved with the process, and everything else. So everything needs to be part of the package for it to be considered a validation. Any questions so far? Any inputs?
So far, we're running through the lists that have been sent in already, and we're ready for number 3.
All right, sounds good. Fire away.
When might it make sense to utilize vendors for executing the IQ/OQ versus performing it myself internally?
Okay, so I would say that anytime you purchase an instrument that yields results, that actually anything that touches your product, it is a good idea to have the vendor qualify those instruments. First of all, it's easier on everyone. It's much easier to have the vendor do it, because if you think about when you're going to qualify something and you don't know that instrument, you have to search the regulations that applies to that. You have to search the user guide and digest that user guide, find out what the acceptance criteria are, what the critical aspects of the instruments are, and then you got to develop that protocol and hope that what you designed is adequate, right? That it really tested everything that you needed to. While a vendor, they know exactly that product in and out. They know the critical aspects of the instrument. They know every test, everything that the instrument performs on, all the features on that instrument, and they will be able to develop a proper protocol to test that instrument to its maximum, to be really exhaustive. And also they will train you, right? And they will make sure that the acceptance criteria are met. And if there is anything about the instrument that they've seen in the past, they will make sure that they will watch out for those things. While if you don't know the instrument as well as a vendor, you wouldn't be able to catch on those things. So I highly would recommend, if it's anything in the lab that is touching a product that is producing results, it's definitely a good idea to have the vendor do it. And again, you want to make sure that those qualifications is very robust, right? Because you want to assure that the users of whatever it is that you're producing get a high quality result in a high quality product and a safe product.
Fantastic. Next question we have is a PQ always necessary?
Okay, is a PQ always necessary? I'll tell you when a PQ is not necessary. Okay, a PQ is not necessary, for example, if you are performing a test on site, if you're performing a test and then you buy an instrument to replace the instrument you're using is getting older, is getting outdated, and you wanted the new version. As long as you purchase from the same vendor and that vendor has validated that that instrument is equivalent to their previous version, or there is minimal that change that it won't impact the performance of your testing, then you don't need to validate. You don't need to perform the PQ, once again, the performance qualification. You do have to do the IQ/OQ though on that instrument. But as long as you have the documentation from the vendor about equivalency, you don't need to perform another PQ. You do have to, and also the consumables are the same. And you do have to do a PQ if there's anything that changes to a minimum detail, if it's going to impact potentially the results. So you have to be very careful about that, but people do it all the time. So you just have to make sure that you check with your vendor. Another thing too that you wouldn't need a PQ on, and that a lot of people get confused about, is on air samplers. Do I need to do a PQ on my air samplers? I need to do an IQ/OQ, but no, a PQ is not required for air samplers, because air samplers, think about when you do a performance qualification, right? You use controls. You can't really control air. You can't sample the same air twice. So let's say you do, when we're qualifying something, it has to be statistically relevant, the results. So we run multiple tests, and then we take an average, and it has to fall within the specification. So if you have a result that is one colony, and then the next test that you do has 0 colonies, 0 and 1 is 100%. So it will not meet the acceptance criteria, even though it's just one colony. So and you can't really control that, and you can't know how much organisms are in the air. So what ISO 14698 states is that the validation of the recovery efficiency has to be demonstrated. So, you know, that impaction is not affecting the organisms, that you know, you're not stressing any potential organisms that are collected through the sampler. So all of this is usually demonstrated by the vendor, and the vendor usually does have that report that they can provide to you, and you can add to your validation package to say that no, PQ, it was not done per ISO. It's a requirement from the vendor, and it has been done, and here's the documentation that efficiency has been proven. And you also, the vendor, they have, those tests are done, and the way that you do it is in a very controlled facility, and they do offer those facilities. There are contractors that offer that service, where they have a very controlled room, and they have a pretty good idea of the amount of organisms that are in the air to be collected. So, and there's enough of them that when you collect multiple samples, it will fall within the acceptance criteria if the instrument is functioning correctly, and it's within calibration and it meets the other criteria. So the vendor does that. A functionality test is done, but it's it's a third party, usually hired people that actually have the capability to have these controlled environments in order to get a representative result. And now, should a third party do a PQ? There are contract labs that will do a PQ for you if you don't have the expertise or the capabilities or the bandwidth internally. They will do it for you. Contract labs everywhere. And we, at Millipore Sigma, in our lab in Burlington, Mass, we do offer that service to customers to perform, to execute PQs for them. What you will need, though, is a method transfer. So you want to be able to, when you get that PQ package, you want to make sure that you can repeat the same results that the external party obtained, that you can reproduce it in your facility, right? Because after all, that's the whole point of validation, that those can be reproduced. So as long as you do that method transfer and do some testing internally to make sure that you can repeat the results to a much smaller scale than what it was done during the PQ, you can definitely have it done externally. So those are really the cases that I can think of in regards to the PQ, not doing the PQ, or having to do it any time, every time. Does anybody else have any other ideas or questions in regards to this? You guys are awfully quiet today.
All right. Next question.
All right.
What is method development, and why should it be done before the PQ execution?
Okay, so method development, so it's very important and actually must be done before the PQ. Okay, because during method development, that's where you're going to figure out how to best develop an optimal, how to really optimize that testing, right? That testing procedure that is also cost effective, because samples can cost a lot. So you want to make sure that you check the regulatory requirements. What is the minimum amount that of sample that I need to take out of that batch? And also, what is really a representative sample to prove or to show that the best that we can, that batch is safe and it's not contaminated. And you also don't want to be spending, 4 or 5 times the amount of rinsing that you would if you had tested during method development and discovered that if you only do 1 rinse, you're gonna get the recovery that you need. So it's definitely worth the time and the effort in the beginning. And also, you don't go to the PQ and find out during the PQ that you're not getting a recovery, that you're not getting you're getting what you need, and you can't really repeat. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, which means that, you know, usually you have to optimize the method in order for it to be repeatable. So it's definitely worth the time to do that. That's when you really have the opportunity. So we've seen a lot of people, they just kind of go with a similar product. I have a similar product that's tested this way, I'm just going to test it the same way. Or, you know, from previous knowledge that people just have, they figure out this is how we're going to do it. This is what the regulations say. It works good. So yes, it might work, but it doesn't mean it's the optimal method. And it might be costing you a lot of time and also money for not having that optimal test. And a lot of times, you know, how many scientists in the lab I come across and they say, oh, it takes me half an hour to filter the sample. Yes, it can be done, but do you really want to spend a half an hour filtering a sample if you can find out a way during your method development that it can be filtered within 10 minutes or 5 minutes? So yeah, it might not be a big deal for one sample, but when you're talking about 20, 30, 50 samples a day, now you're really, really adding up. So this is really a great idea to do. If you have old methods, I highly recommend you to go back to them, especially methods that are not working very well. Try to go back to them and give it a second look. Of course, you're going to have to do a second PQ if you develop a different method, but sometimes it's worthwhile depending what it's costing you in time and money. And analyst sanity too, because sometimes they really get upset when they have to do a test, because they're like, I hate doing this test because it takes forever, it doesn't work, and I have to bang the canister on the side of the pump for it to filter and all of that stuff. So it avoids all of that, and it really streamline your testing process.
Fantastic. So next question. Why is performing a PM periodically on my equipment, on my instrument, important, and why is it a good idea for the vendor to do it?
Okay, so this one, so first we do this because it's required, right? 21 CFR 5863, I believe, states that equipment and instrumentation need to be testing, particularly testing instrumentation and equipment, have to be properly inspected, calibrated, and maintained. I believe USP 1058 also states that. It doesn't really state how often, it doesn't really give that. The regulatory bodies really leave that to the vendors to make suggestions on that, because the vendors, again, they know the instrumentation, they know how long a calibration holds on that particular instrument. So they make recommendations. The rule of thumb out there is 1 year, every year, but there are some instrumentations that, you know, let's say a high precision instrument, you might have to calibrate twice a year. You might have to do every 6 months. There might be others that you can do every 2 years. So you really have to consult the vendor on that, but you definitely want to make sure that you're on top of that. A large amount of 483s that are out there in FDA observations are non-calibrated, non-properly maintained instruments. So this is something that you definitely have to watch for in order to have your inspection go well. And why is it a good idea to have the vendor do it? So again, you want to make sure that so let's say if you do it on site, right? You just do the calibration, and if it falls within calibration, okay, you're good. But the vendor, you want to make sure that the parts are working properly. So in addition to doing the calibration, the vendor has the capability to do an adjustment. So when they receive the instrument, they do an as found. And if it's out of calibration, they have the capability to adjust that and make it go into calibration. So they have that capability, which you don't have internally. The vendor also look for wear parts. And if they see that a part is about to go, they're going to call you and say, hey, I have this part, it's on its last legs. You might want to replace it now because it might break on you a month later when you're in the middle of a critical test. So they will be able to do that. And they also change some, tubing, gaskets and stuff like that that just naturally wears out. That could definitely influence on the performance of your instrument later. So those are all the capabilities that a vendor has that you don't have. So if it's something that it's a critical instrumentation, you might, not want to do it on an air sampler or something like that. But when it comes to a critical testing instrument, I would definitely recommend a vendor to do it.
Thank you. We got a question. If the vendor will do the IQ-OQ protocol execution, am I required to do an internal protocol before the vendor is on site?
Could you repeat the question for me, Michelle? You are a little low.
Sure. If the vendor will do the IQ-OQ protocol execution, am I required to do an internal protocol before the vendor is on site?
Okay. No. So if the vendor sells you the protocol and they say it's a validation protocol, then that protocol is complete. So it will have everything that you need to call that instrument fully qualified. Now, sometimes a vendor will sell you a qualification protocol. So they didn't really develop the entire validation, but they will sell you the qualification that pretty much tests out the critical aspects of that instrument. In that case, you might want to add, you take that qualification and you add to a protocol binder that you develop internally with, proper documentations, references of SOPs that will be used, regulatory requirements, and all of that other stuff that makes part of a validation package. So it really will depend on what the vendor is offering and how complete that is. And then you need to do it or you might not need to do it. But there is no need. If it's a validation protocol, you should be able to go with that.
Thank you. And
Great.
Last question, another question that came in was new equipment installation and implementation is a big task on the QC lab. What services does Millipore Sigma offer to offer this process to make this process as smooth as possible?
Okay, so we offer, and that's, something great about Millipore Sigma. And, I've been in the industry for a while. And I worked in pharma for about 10 years. And that was one thing that I really liked about Millipore Sigma. I was a customer, was that we support the entire life cycle of that instrument from beginning to end. So when you're talking, and that is something that you want to consider when you're buying a piece of equipment, because you want to also make sure that the support around that instrument it can be almost as critical as the instrument itself. Because if you can get the service that you need, for example, proper installation, if the vendor doesn't respond, or if you call and they can only come to get you up and running in a month, all of that stuff really makes a big difference on a QC scenario, because we're GMP and we have to follow these proper procedures to bring an instrument up and running. So it's very critical that the support that we get around that is as good, or if not better, than the instrument itself. So we offer, like I said, the entire life cycle of the instrument. So we have the installation, we offer IQ-OQ services, we offer PQ consulting. If you don't want to, if you don't want to execute on site, or you don't have the capability, we can execute the PQ for you, or we can do a consulting where we're going to spend time with you on the phone and video conferences, and why not, to help you come up with the best PQ plan for you to execute. We also offer repairs here in Burlington and on-site. We offer PM services and also end of life verification. And the end of life, a lot of people don't think about that, but end of life it's pretty much how you close the life cycle of the instrument, right? So you want to know that when you retire that instrument instrument was within specification. So what we offer is we test the instrument, we get it in and we say, hey, before this instrument went out of commission, it was found within specification, it was within working order, and then we're retiring it. And we issue a sort of a closing report. So then you'd have, you know, the documentation from the installation of that equipment all the way to when it was retired. And it's just almost like a death certificate, if you will. But it's there, it just brings closure to that instrument and the entire package, and you know everything about that instrument beginning to end. So if there is a litigation later on, 5 years from now, you can go back and say, hey, no, it wasn't because of the instrument, because we have checked everything and everything was closed in within.
Fantastic. Okay. Product education and hands-on evaluation is an important part of the instrument purchasing process. What does MilliporeSigma offer to support the pre-sale of that?
Okay, so as part of the sales process, we have tax specialists that support the sales organization in selling of instruments. And the tax specialists will come on site and they will educate you in everything you need to know in regards to that product, in regards to the instrument. And they will also, they could offer on-site evaluation or in-house evaluation. So they could bring in the equipment and they can train you on using the equipment and leave the equipment with you for a little while for you to test it out. You can also come to us in Burlington if you want to spend a couple of days with us. You can bring your samples and we can run some samples with you to evaluate that technology to make sure that you can overcome any challenges that your matrix may have with recovery, with filterability, or whatever it may be, and make sure that's really compatible. So that's all before purchasing. And then once the purchasing takes place, we actually also before the purchasing, we offer feasibility studies, which that's where we really test out your matrix and make sure that it's compatible with what you're looking into purchasing. So that is all pre-sale support that we offer. We also offer method development once you purchase, that we can develop that method for you if you don't have the capability. We also offer extensive training. We offer regulatory training around that particular instrumentation that you bought, and pretty much tax support. Our tax service, we have a dedicated tax service team for biomonitoring products that they can also help you once that comes into play. But yeah, it's pretty much full support, and we give you full exposure to our products before and after you purchase it.
Thank you. That was the last of the pre-submitted questions. We're opening up the floor for anybody else to submit into the chat, please. Let us know what's on your mind.
All right. So we are at about half an hour, so right on time, and I will give a few minutes for discussions and questions if you guys have any. I hope that this was able to clear some things for you. And again, these were questions that we get often on the road, or customers email and call us in regards to these. If you have any additional questions after this call, don't hesitate to send us an email or contact us, and we'll do our best to answer them for you as well.
A question that often comes up is, how long do some of these validations take? Can you speak to that? Yes.
So it really depends on the amount of instruments that you buy. But for example, for an IQOQ, for a sterility pump, for example, we can get it done in about 2 days time, versus, you know, people who try to do it themselves, sometimes it can take them weeks just to go through the protocol. I mean, our protocol is pretty extensive. It's about 200 pages plus. So just to go over the protocol and digest that and now start executing, it can take a long time. But if you have us do it, so if you do it yourself, yeah, it could take, you know, weeks. But if MilliporeSigma does it, normally takes about a couple days. And then also we have method developments, for example. So and again, sometimes we have to try different things in order to get that method to its optimal performance, but you know, within a week or two, a lot of times we can get those out, at least the initial testing, and you know, we can come out with that and say, hey, you know, but we think that this is what we got, but we think that we can improve this a little more. If you want to give us more time, if you want to try other things. So it's fairly quickly. Usually the turnaround is fairly quickly.
Okay, we got a question regarding the Symbio pump. Will the IQ/OQ be done first, then will the vendor come back when we are ready for the validation protocol to be executed, or is this all done at the same time?
Yeah, so the IQ/OQ is part of the validation protocol. Okay, so the validation protocol is composed of a master plan. This is where you define the plan of the validation. Then you have the IQ, OQ, and PQ. So and then you have the summary and the final report. So this composes the validation protocol. So when the vendor comes on site to do that for you, they will execute the IQ and the OQ. And then the PQ part is usually the customer's responsibility. And again, then that's when you're going to decide, are you going to execute that part yourself? You're going to go to a third party to do it? Are you going to want us to consult with you and help you to come up with the best plan to executing that PQ and figuring out amount of consumables needed and all of that good stuff, which organisms should you challenge against and all of that? But it's all part of the validation package. And once the whole thing is complete, then your instrument is qualified, your steri test is ready to go. And hopefully in parallel with that, you're also doing the method development. If you don't have a method already developed, as you're doing the IQ/OQ, you probably already want to be working on a method development so you can get the PQ done once you have that method done.
Thank you.
Anything else?
At this time, that's it.
I will give it another couple minutes just in case someone is typing.
You train the people also in these facilities, right? Do they get a certificate or anything like that?
Yes, correct. As part of the IQ/OQ service, we offer a full training of the lab staff, and we provide the training certificate as well. So that's no extra charge for the IQ/OQ, as part of the service. All right, if there are no other questions, we are going to end it. Thank you so much for coming to my home today. I hope this was helpful, and don't hesitate in contacting me if I can be of any assistance to you guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Thank you.